and welcome to Inside the Americas here on France 24. I'm Delano D'Souza. Coming up on the show this week, Joe Biden wins 9 states on Super Tuesday, the former vice president claiming he started a movement, but his rival Bernie Sanders says you can't defeat Trump by offering more of the same. And voters in Guyana determined which party oversees an oil boom in the third poorest country in South America. Now we begin with our picture of the week. Joe Biden looking extremely pleased with himself. The former vice president's campaign has a new lease on life after securing 9 states on Super Tuesday. Biden knows he hasn't started a revolution but claims he started a movement. His rival Bernie Sanders says you can't defeat Donald Trump by offering more of the same.
The race for Democratic presidential nominee is only just heating up. 14 states voted in Super Tuesday contests, where more delegates were up for grabs than any single day in the primary calendar. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders came out on top, with former Vice President Biden winning the most number of states.
I'm here to report we are very much alive. And make no mistake about it, this campaign will send Donald Trump packing. This campaign is taking off. Join us.
Sanders was equally as confident. The Vermont senator took California, its large number of delegates making it the biggest prize of the night.
I tell you with absolute confidence, we are going to win the Democratic nomination. And we are going to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of this country.
It was a disappointing night for Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg. Warren lost in her home state of Massachusetts, while Bloomberg's disappointing showing forced him to suspend his candidacy. Now shaping up to be a 2-man race, primaries continue in the 26 remaining states until June, leading to the all-important Democratic National Convention on July 13th. When candidates for president and vice president are confirmed. The next contests come on March 10th in 6 states. A candidate needs 1,991 delegates to clinch the nomination. But if no one reaches that number before July 13th, there would be what's called a brokered convention, something that hasn't happened since 1952. That's when all of the almost 4,000 delegates become free agents, able to vote for whichever candidate they want in a second round. 771 party insiders called superdelegates would also come into play. A candidate would need a majority of all delegates to secure the nomination, including those superdelegates.
For more on what happens now that Super Tuesday is done, we can bring in Paul Schor, professor at the University of Paris and author of Counting Americans, How the U.S. Census Classified the Nation. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Joe Biden has now solidified his comeback after South Carolina, hasn't he?
Yes, he clearly won the Super Tuesday. And so he was really trailing, and now he seems to be ahead in number of delegates. But also, for the time being, at least the momentum is really on his side.
Why is Joe Biden the establishment choice?
Well, he was vice president for Barack Obama, and he promises to continue the sort of moderate reform that was what Obama did, whereas Sanders promises more radical changes, radical transformation. And also Sanders for a long time was not even a Democrat. He was an independent, and he's not an insider of the Democratic Party, unlike Biden.
But let's talk about 2016, because you have to refer to 2016 when the establishment choice, who was Hillary Clinton, failed to win the election against Donald Trump.
Yes, it's true. I mean, they should be worried about that. But I think the establishment it was impossible for them to accept that they would let Sanders be the candidate. I mean, if they had given some support to Sanders, he might have done better. But they tried to block him, and now apparently they are successful at this.
I mean, they are successful. I mean, given that we're seeing Joe Biden do so well in the past few days alone, we've had 2, contenders drop out of the race. That obviously is a factor, isn't it?
Oh, clearly. I mean, it was very clear in Minnesota. Biden did not campaign in Minnesota. Minnesota was expected to be for Amy Klobuchar, who's the senator of Minnesota. She quit the race, asked her supporters to vote for Biden, and they did. And so the big surprise was that in the Midwest, which supposedly would have been a better place for Sanders, Biden won.
Sorry to cut you off, but let's talk about Elizabeth Warren for a second, because she's the one to watch when you watch debates recently. Yes. She's the one who's putting all the candidates their feet to their fire rather. Why is she struggling?
Well, it's a very good question. Obviously, objectively, she's a great candidate. She's prepared. She's great in debates. She has a program that is very serious. She answers everything. But she has not been able to create this sort of movement that Bernie Sanders had. Perhaps because Bernie Sanders was already a candidate in 2016 and started very early by building a base and having a group of followers across the country. And she appeared to be more on her own in a way. Not that she was really on her own, but she does not have the same movement that Sanders had. But I mean, if you had asked me 3 months ago whether it would be Sanders or Warren who would be the leader on the progressive side, I would have told you, I don't know.
But is it also because Americans just aren't ready to have a woman as a head of state?
It could have played a role. There is some impression of that coming out of post-voting interviews with voters. But it's perhaps also because she seems to be, in some ways, a technocrat. She's a university professor. I have nothing against university professors.
Really not.
But she appears at the time to be a little brainy, perhaps. But I think it's also simply, as it happened for Biden, that her lane was crowded.
Let's talk about running mates, because we have the Democratic leadership, because they have a tough choice on their hands. Do they have, present a candidate who holds diametrically opposite views to Donald Trump in the form of Bernie Sanders, or have an establishment choice, Joe Biden?
Well, the establishment of the party is going to do everything they can to get Biden as the candidate, including, if it comes to a brokered convention, to throw the weight of the superdelegates on his side. In terms of running mate, we will know this only once we know who the candidate is, because they can choose the running mate at the very end of the process. And that's where they're supposed to choose someone who would add a segment of the electorate. I mean, some people have been saying Warren could be the running mate for both Sanders and Biden. I don't see her going with Biden, but you never know what people do.
Anything can happen. Paul Schor, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
To Guyana next, which held elections on Monday. The crucial election will determine which party oversees an oil boom in the third poorest country in South America. Racial tensions, too, playing a factor as voters cast their ballots. France 24 correspondents on the ground filed this report from the capital, Georgetown.
The port of Georgetown, Guyana, is buzzing with activity. More than 8 billion barrels of recoverable oil were discovered 5 years ago off the country's shores, an invisible gold exploited for only the past 3 months. These workers provide logistical support each week to the offshore oil bases 300 kilometres away.
We would deliver approximately what you see out here about every week. That is a lot of pipes, yes. It keeps the guys very busy.
Sean Hill's company has hired and trained more than 300 people from Guyana.
I reckon our business volume is probably going to double in the next couple of years. The expectation, the number of people here is probably going to double in about the next 2 years as well. And that will all be filled with national content.
Nestled between Venezuela, Brazil and Suriname, the 780,000 Guyanese nationals are rarely talked about. Yet the former British colony and one of the poorest countries in South America is about to break a record. The country's GDP is set to balloon by 86% in 2020, according to the International Monetary Fund. Oil revenue has become central to the presidential campaign.
That is what I would expect, that we can develop and everyone will benefit.
We've been getting a lot of other resources going out and we ain't getting nothing.
Accustomed to exploiting its natural resources in gold and bauxite, a sedimentary rock that is the world's main source of aluminium, Guyana is now rich in oil. Contested by neighbouring Venezuela, its reserves extend over several thousand kilometres.
So this here is the famous Stabroek block. This is Exxon, Total.
The mining secretary carefully guards his treasure.
Are looking to other experiences, other examples, whether they be in Africa or other places, Venezuela next door. The beauty about Guyana coming in at this stage is that it has the opportunity to learn the good and the not so good of how the industry operates.
Suspected of having sold off the country's interests to ExxonMobil, the government was the subject of a ceasefire motion last year. Oil here revives old racial tensions between the two main coalitions, Indo and Afro-Guyanese. Many international observers monitor the electoral polls.
Today there are lots of issues. Oil's in the backs of people's minds. The history of Guyana shows that there's always been a question of ethnicity, which is always tied to things like elections and the recognition of election results.
The black gold could make Guyana the richest country in the world. Independent since 1966, this tiny country is plagued by corruption, so the oil windfall is as much of a blessing as it is a curse.
That's it for this edition of Inside the Americas. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.
France 24, c'est la richesse de la diversité culturelle mondiale avec un réseau de correspondants à travers la planète.
En France 24 en español comunicamos a Latinoamérica con el mundo entero.
روح مهنية شعارها واحد حرية التعبير. هذه هي بصمة France 24.
Africa on France 24 is about its people and their stories.
Los ciudadanos nos cuentan cuáles son las iniciativas y las problemáticas que tienen en sus comunidades a través del programa Los Observadores. Eso los acerca aún más a France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.